They always thought the end would come slow, like a creeping shadow. A cold war of whispers and rising tides, maybe. Climate collapse, a bioweapon, even AI gone rogue. But not this, not them. No one expected the sky to split open on a Tuesday. It began with a flicker, a blip in the upper atmosphere over the Pacific, at first mistaken for a gamma-ray burst. And then, every satellite camera turned at once. Every orbiting sensor screamed in its own digital language. Something massive had just translated into real space. Inside Earth's geosynchronous orbit, it wasn't a ship. It was a leviathan, a monstrous slab of moving black metal and biomechanical tendrils the size of a small city. It glided forward like it had been waiting in the dark for centuries, waiting for this moment. For us, Captain Lena Voss was aboard the UED Icarus, orbiting 400 kilometers above the Indian Ocean when the first tremor hit. It wasn't the kind that made walls crack or buildings sway. No, this was deeper, primal, like the Earth itself took a breath it didn't want to let go of. She looked up from the tactical display just as the entire bridge dimmed. The sky outside went red. Then came the noise, an alien frequency no human throat could replicate, low and wrong, like a song hummed backwards by a god choking on its own blood. Her comms officer, Ensign Keiru, paled. Captain, they're broadcasting. Voss didn't need translation. The message played across every frequency, TVs, radios, smart implants, even cochlear replacements. The Kolvar didn't ask for negotiation. They didn't issue threats. They offered one word: surrender. The Icarus bridge was silent, save for the heartbeat thump of distant orbital cannons warming up. Captain Voss stood slowly. She had served on the Jovian border, fought pirates in the Kuiper Belt, stared down mercenary fleets that tore colonies apart for fuel. But this was different, and still her hands didn't shake. Are all defense platforms online? Kara nodded, though her voice cracked. Yes, ma'am. Emberline stations 1 through 5 report ready. Orders. Voss looked out the forward viewport. The Kolvar dreadnought was just visible, an obsidian fortress blotting out stars. It hovered above Earth like judgment itself, shrouded in plasma veils and organ metal plating that twisted like it was alive. No orders, Voss said. Then she leaned forward, staring that horror down as if she could bore through it with her gaze. Fire everything we've got. And just like that, humanity said no. The sky lit up like 1,000 supernovas. Rail slugs the size of train cars tore across orbit, punching trails through the black. Plasma torpedoes screamed from coil batteries. From Earth, it looked like fireworks in hell. Angry streaks of light carving through the void, aiming for the monster that had come to end them. Most of it bounced off. Some of it didn't. A lucky salvo hit dead center, right where the Kolvar dreadnought's external shield coils pulsed. There was a moment, just one, when the air itself seemed to snap, and part of the beast's armor cracked outward like a wounded shell. Biometal fluids vented into space like blood. Earth's first blow had landed. The bridge of the Icarus erupted in cheers. But Voss didn't smile. She knew better. It wasn't over, not even close. Within minutes, the dreadnought moved. No visible propulsion, just a shift, like space itself bent around it. One moment it loomed in silence. The next, it was descending, breaking through the clouds like a falling god. And Earth, united, terrified, defiant, fought back. All across the planet, defense grids snapped to life. Hypersonic interceptors, continental rail cannons, orbital mines detonated in their launch bays just to slow the thing down. It didn't stop it. Shanghai saw the first hit. 1 second the skyline was beautiful, gleaming towers piercing dawn clouds, people sipping tea on rooftops, drone taxis humming through sky lanes. Then, everything went white. The Kolvar dreadnought opened a vent beneath its core, unleashing a cascade of plasma energy that cut a line straight through the heart of the city. Skyscrapers melted, rivers boiled, streets vanished. 17 million people gone in 12 seconds. The world watched in horror. But what happened next? What happened next is why we're still here. Because after Shanghai, Earth didn't surrender. It roared. Every military unit, every half-broken mech, every conscripted militia, every AI-run turret from Seoul to Nairobi lit up the skies. The defense of Earth became a frenzy, a chain reaction of madness and bravery. And the Icarus? The Icarus charged straight into the fire. Captain Voss ordered a full intercept run, even as the dreadnought's escort crafts peeled away to engage them. Their shielding systems strained. Two corvettes in their escort vanished in blue-white fire. But Voss never blinked. "We are the Anvil," she said calmly into the fleet-wide channel. "We hold the line. We take the hits so Earth can hit back." Inside, her gut churned. But outside, she was stone. By the time the dreadnought hit atmosphere over Africa, Earth's Defense Command had launched the Ember Line. A last-ditch, just out of testing, completely insane defense mechanism. Imagine this. An invisible net of interceptor satellites strung together by kinetic tethers, forming a kind of orbital tripwire. If any enemy vessel crossed the net, each node would launch tungsten rods downward, creating high-velocity spikes that could punch holes through asteroids, let alone ships. The Kolvar crossed the line, and hell followed. Rods screamed from orbit like angry gods. The dreadnought twisted, trying to evade. It couldn't. One rod struck its dorsal plate, another hit lower, then a third, right beneath the core housing. The ship buckled midair, veering off course. It missed its target, Johannesburg, by 90 kilometers, and crashed in the Kalahari Desert instead. The Earth trembled as fire bloomed across the sands. From space, it looked like a second sun being born. For 5 seconds, no one said anything. Then Voss, sweating, bleeding from a cut on her brow, collapsed into her command chair. "Damage report." "Ember lines fried," Kara replied, her voice half gone from screaming. "2/3 of our orbital defenses are down. Ground forces reporting severe losses." "And the dreadnought?" Kara looked up, eyes wide. "It's still moving." Captain Voss didn't curse. She didn't cry. She simply stood. "Then we go down there." The bridge stared at her. "You mean land?" "I mean finish it." And in that moment, every officer, every enlisted crew member, every shaken soul aboard the Icarus understood. This wasn't about winning. This was about refusing to lose. Far below, as the smoldering wreck of the Kolvar dreadnought groaned and pulsed in its death throes, something inside Earth cracked wide open. Not fear, not despair, but rage. Rage that would burn for every lost child, every shattered city, every home that would never hear laughter again. The first impact wasn't the end. It was the beginning, the start of the fight that would make the stars remember who humans are. Not the most advanced, not the oldest, not even the smartest, but the most relentless. And now? Now the universe had made a mistake. It had come for Earth, and Earth had decided to punch back. War has a rhythm, not the kind you hear in drums or marching boots. No, war's rhythm is chaos. The thud of failing shields, the scream of metal under strain, the sharp inhale of a soldier before the breach. You don't listen to it so much as feel it, like it's crawling under your skin. And on the second day of the invasion, war came to orbit. The Ember Line, humanity's final perimeter defense in low Earth orbit, wasn't designed for glory. It was a stitched-together patchwork of what we had, not what we needed. Old corvettes running on borrowed time, half-finished weapon platforms, converted mining satellites, turned into makeshift cannons. It was desperation wrapped in duct tape and steel, but it was all we had left. And as the Kolvar dropships began punching through the sky like spears of shadow, the Ember Line snapped to life. Sergeant Ajay Singh was already knee-deep in the mess when the breach alarm started screaming. Node 9, his assignment, was a support station bolted between two defense satellites, barely big enough for a squad and a few gun emplacements. It wasn't built to withstand a direct hit, but that's exactly what it got. A Kolvar boarding spike smashed through the starboard hull at 0900, spinning, barbed, alive. It hissed open and spilled out horrors. Creatures like something from a drowned world, six-limbed, plated in obsidian armor that writhed like snakeskin. They didn't speak. They didn't negotiate. They just charged. Singh's squad held the breach point for 12 minutes. 12 minutes of screaming, of blood on bulkheads, of knuckles white on triggers, and men shouting final prayers between gunfire. Then the outer door ruptured, and vacuum claimed half the corridor. Singh managed to hit the emergency seal just before he was pulled into space. His suit cracked, his side bled, but he was still breathing, and so he kept fighting. Because the only thing between Earth and annihilation was a handful of people like him, too damn stubborn to die quietly. Node 9 is going dark, came the voice through the comms, choppy, desperate. It was relayed straight to the bridge of the Icarus, still orbiting above the chaos, still burning its engines trying to cover what pieces of the Ember Line remained. Captain Lena Voss heard the plea, her jaw set like iron. "How many down?" "Unknown." We lost their telemetry. They're still broadcasting emergency beacons. Kaoru, her comms officer, turned to her, voice tight. Ma'am, we're stretched thin. If we divert, we lose position. Voss didn't hesitate, not even a second. Divert. The Icarus dropped hard and fast, its engine screaming as it curved down over the southern flank of the Ember Line, throwing aside every cautionary protocol in the book. The ship wasn't meant for that kind of maneuvering. The frame groaned. Stressed to hell. But it held. They reached Node 9 just as the last of Singh's squad was falling back to the inner control ring. Kolvar assault craft were latched onto the node like ticks, plasma welders carving into the infrastructure. More boarding parties inbound. Voss narrowed her eyes. Time to show them what humans do when backed into a corner. Here's what the Kolvar didn't understand. We don't just fight with weapons. We fight with will. Voss fired the Icarus's ventral thrusters at maximum throttle, realigning the entire destroyer on a collision course with the enemy dropcraft. Not missiles, not lasers. The ship itself became a weapon. Brace for impact. The pilot shouted. The Icarus slammed into the side of the Kolvar boarding vessel with the full weight of orbital velocity. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't clean, but it worked. The alien ship crumpled like a can. Explosive decompression lit the sky as debris and bodies scattered into orbit. The impact sent tremors through the Icarus's spine. Lights flickered, consoles overloaded, but the crew stayed standing. No one panicked, because Voss was still there, still calm, still commanding, still dangerous. Deploy Marines. Secure the node. Ajay Singh was down to his last clip when the Icarus team hit the breach. He didn't hear the gunships. He didn't see the drop pods. He just saw the corridor behind the Kolvar open like a trapdoor and black-armored Marines pour in, firing, flanking, cleaning house. A moment later, a gloved hand dragged him up. He blinked through cracked visor glass. You Singh? The Marine asked. Singh nodded. Captain Voss says you owe her a beer. Singh laughed. A raw, painful sound. She just saved my ass. The Marine grinned. You're the one who held out 12 minutes. She says you saved ours. As the dust cleared and emergency systems hissed back to life, the Ember Line held, just barely. Node 9 was broken but not gone. They patched it with scrap, welded new hull plates, propped up the guns with prayer and spit. It wasn't pretty, but it didn't have to be, because it still worked. And sometimes, that's enough. The next wave came harder. Kolvar reinforcements, sleek, blade-shaped cruisers with glowing ventral cores, swooped in with calculated fury, targeting the Ember Line's weakest points. Earth's remaining defense ships scrambled, dozens of them, swarming like wasps. And yet, it felt like a knife fight against tanks. One by one, human ships lit up and vanished, blossoming into white-hot plumes of twisted hull and screams caught mid-transmission. But for every vessel lost, another surged forward to take its place. They weren't fighting for medals. They were fighting for time. Every second they bought, more civilians evacuated, more bunkers sealed, more systems came online. It was like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands, and doing it anyway. At one point, Kaya turned to Voss, voice breaking. We can't keep this up. We're losing too many. Voss didn't look away from the viewport. She watched as the Icarus's sister ship, the UD Resolute, rammed a Kolvar gunship mid-fire, detonating its core reactor in a brilliant, final act of defiance. The shockwave punched through 3 enemy drones and knocked 2 others off course. Kaoru flinched. They didn't eject. No, Voss said quietly. They didn't. Kaoru hesitated, then whispered, What do we tell their families? Voss turned. Her voice was low, steady, certain. We tell them the Resolute lived up to her name. By the end of the day, the Ember Line had lost 41% of its stations. Half the fleet was either destroyed or critically damaged. Casualties stretched into the tens of thousands. But the Kolvar hadn't broken through. Not yet. They would regroup, of course. They would come again, stronger, smarter, angry. But now they knew. Earth wasn't defenseless. Humanity wouldn't run, wouldn't kneel, wouldn't die quietly. Later that night, Singh sat in a ruined corridor of Node 9, helmet in his lap, arm in a makeshift sling. Around him, engineers welded plates into place, sparks flying in 0G. A Marine passed him a bottle of water and a protein bar. You good? Singh shrugged. Alive. The Marine paused. We've got orders. Captain says the next push comes tomorrow. Says she wants fighters who don't scare easy. Singh gave a small, tired smile. Then she's got a whole damn planet to choose from. In orbit, the Earth slowly rotated below. Black scars marked where cities once stood. Fires still burned in the highlands. Storm systems churned over oceans seeded with debris. But above it all, the ember lines still shimmered, bent, bruised, bleeding, but there. And sometimes, that's the difference between extinction and endurance. Sometimes, survival isn't about who's strongest. It's about who won't stop standing back up, even after the world tries to knock them down. Even after death knocks on their front door with fire and fury. Because humanity is really hard to kill. The moon had always been more than just a satellite. To dreamers, it was poetry. To scientists, it was a stepping stone. To humanity, it was the first proof that we could reach beyond ourselves. That maybe, just maybe, the stars weren't out of reach. But now the moon was a battlefield. They called it Tycho Station. Once, a pristine research hub tucked into the rim of Tycho crater, glass domes, solar fields, laboratories humming with the quiet magic of human progress. Families lived there. Kids played in simulated gravity parks. Astronomers mapped the galaxy from its observation spires. Then the Cold War came, and Tycho became a graveyard. By the third day of the war, Luna's surface was littered with twisted metal, blown-out habitats, and cooling bodies. Cold War skirmish cruisers drifted just above the surface, deploying drop pods like seeds of death. And whatever held them back, whatever didn't break on impact, got torn apart by the things inside. But humanity didn't abandon the moon. Because that's the thing about humans, we don't run from scars. We build trenches in them. Commander Miguel Ortega wasn't supposed to be there. He was too senior, too valuable, but that's exactly why he insisted on staying. Because someone had to make the hard calls in the thick of it. Someone had to stand where the dying was loudest. And Miguel Ortega had spent a lifetime learning how to be that man. He led from the front, always had, even now, with a ruptured suit, dried blood caking his shoulder, and half his squad down, he was still marching across the fractured regolith like he owned the damn place. "Status report," he growled, stepping into a half-collapsed comms bay. One of his techs, barely 20, spun around, helmet cracked, eyes wide with panic. "Sir, Tycho West is gone. Crater Ridge batteries are out. We've got 4 hours of backup power. Tops? And the endurance is still 5 hours out. Then we hold for 5 hours." The kid swallowed. "But the perimeter," I said, "we hold." And when Miguel Ortega said it like that, no one argued. They turned what was left of the central dome into a kind of last stand. A circle of scavenged mechs, flipped cargo haulers, sandbag plasma emplacements, all powered by one sputtering reactor and a prayer. It looked like hell, but it worked. And out there, past the crater lip, Kolvar skitterlings were moving. Hundreds of them, crawling in the low gravity like spindly spiders, armored in plates that shimmered like oil slicks in sunlight. They didn't stop, didn't sleep, didn't feel fear. But they also didn't understand what they were walking into. Because waiting behind that busted dome was a species that had crawled from mud, survived plagues, and learned to crack atoms just so it could protect its own. And in that moment, as the enemy crested the crater, every soldier inside Tycho knew exactly what they were fighting for. The first wave hit like a tsunami. The outer barricades didn't hold. They were never meant to. They were there to slow the bastards down, make them bleed a little before they got close. And bleed they did. Auto turrets buzzed to life, sweeping arcs of heat through skitterlings. Claymore mines popped like thunder. Moon dust flew in every direction. But the Kolvar kept coming. Ortega and his squad met them at the breach point, a half-melted corridor that used to lead to a cafeteria. Now it was a charnel house. He fought like a man possessed, blast shotgun in one hand, sidearm in the other. When his weapon jammed, he swung it like a club. When that broke, he grabbed a mining pick from a corpse and drove it through a Kolvar's faceplate. "Push forward," he roared, even as fire danced around them. "No one falls back. This is our F*****ing rock." And somehow they held. By hour 3, the skitterlings were dead or twitching, bodies stacked waist-high in the corridors, blood pooled in the dust. Not human blood, Kolvar ichor, black and acidic, hissing where it touched steel. Ortega slumped against a cracked pillar, chest heaving. Half his armor was scorched. His knuckles bled from punching something he couldn't even name. But when a young private stumbled over, scared out of her mind, he looked up with fire in his eyes. "You did good, soldier. You did damn good." That's when the real problem arrived. Above the crater, massive, almost graceful, a Kolvar war form descended. Not a drone, not an infantry unit. This thing was a walking cathedral of pain, 12 meters tall, pulsing with bioluminescent cores. Its arms ended in whip blades. Its face was a smooth silver plate, empty and cruel. The soldiers called it the Warden because it didn't just kill, it judged. The Warden landed just outside the main dome, sending up a cloud of dust and shattered alloy. It didn't rush, it didn't roar. It just walked, slowly, like it knew nothing inside could stop it. And honestly, it was right. Ortega stood at the main airlock, watching it come. He turned to the only engineer still breathing. "We got anything that can punch through that thing?" The man hesitated. Maybe if we overcharge the railgun, but it's not built for it. Do it. You'll blow the whole bay. Then get everyone out of the bay." The engineer stared at him. "Sir, you won't survive the blast." Ortega smiled grimly, not planning to. Of course, the engineer didn't leave. Because that's the thing about humans. When one of us makes a suicidal stand, the rest show up anyway. That's how it happened. 5 of them. Engineers, medics, 1 Marine with 2 bullets left, scrambling to rig the power lines, stabilize the railgun mount, and time the charge just right. And the whole time, the Warden just kept walking. It tore the outer wall down with a flick of its arm, slid through smoke and ruin like it had all the time in the world. Every step shook the ground. Then it was there face to face with Ortega. No words, no speech, just a weapon and its target. The railgun charged. And just before it fired, Ortega whispered something no one could hear. Some say it was a prayer. Others say it was the names of his children. But what mattered is this. He stood his ground. He didn't run. He didn't beg. He stood. And when the railgun fired, the recoil collapsed half the station. The Warden disappeared in a column of fire. And Ortega, Commander Miguel Ortega, one of the best damn leaders Luna ever had, was gone with it. The Endurance arrived 43 minutes later, too late to save him, but just in time to see the crater filled with wreckage and to realize the impossible had happened. The Warden was dead, and Taika was still human. A week later, they found Ortega's dog tags under a slab of debris. They turned the crater into a memorial, engraved it with his words, "This is our rock," because that was the truth of it. Not just Luna, not just Earth, all of it. Our homes, our skies, our scars, they're ours. And if the Kolvar wanted them, they'd have to dig through a mountain of broken bodies and burned steel. Because the moon may be silent, but it still remembers the footsteps of those who refuse to fall. Trust is a fragile thing. You don't notice it when it's working, when the gears are turning, when orders are followed, when allies have your back without hesitation. But the moment it cracks, the whole machine shudders. And in war, trust is everything. Because when you're surrounded on all sides, bleeding from every wound, fighting with your back to the wall, and your fingers clenched around the last thread of hope, you have to believe the person beside you is aiming in the same direction. But on the 6th day of the invasion, humanity found out that not every enemy wears alien skin. It started with silence, not the kind that comes after a battle, where the air hangs heavy with smoke and grief. This was a different kind. Cold, calculated, surgical. 3 defense satellites in the Atlantic net went dark in under 30 seconds. No explosions, no warning, just gone. Vanished from command telemetry like someone had flipped a switch. At first, they thought it was a glitch, a power failure, maybe sabotage by the Kolvar. But then it happened again, this time in low Martian orbit. And again, near the Europa Relay Station. That's when Captain Lena Voss started to feel it in her bones. The dread that whispers something's wrong. And it's not just out there, it's inside. On board the Icarus, the mood was razor-thin. The crew had been fighting nonstop, sleepless, wounded, operating on adrenaline and instinct. But now they were being told to slow down, recalibrate, audit data streams. And Voss hated it, because audits didn't kill aliens. They didn't protect cities. They wasted time, and time was blood. But orders came from above, high command, specifically from High Counselor Elias Brand. Brand wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a strategist. He was a politician, eloquent, confident, the kind of man who never said no when perhaps would suffice. But he'd spent the last decade climbing the ranks, shaking hands in all the right rooms. And when the war started, somehow, he landed at the top of Earth's Unified Defense Committee. He was also the one who designed the Ember Line, at least on paper. So when he summoned Voss for a secure one-on-one at Relay Theta, one of the last functional orbital command hubs, she went. Not because she wanted to, but because if something was wrong, she'd rather stare the devil in the eyes than hear about it secondhand. Relay Theta was quiet when she docked. Too quiet. Half-lit corridors, empty catwalks, security drones offline. The kind of silence that didn't belong in a war zone. And when she finally found Bran, he was sitting alone in the ops chamber, hands folded, eyes tired, data pads scattered around him like the remains of a broken altar. "Captain Voss," he greeted, voice smooth as ever. "Thank you for coming. I imagine you have questions." She didn't sit. "I'm here for answers." Bran offered a weary smile, the kind meant to disarm. "Of course, but I'd like to explain it properly. I'm not here for a briefing, Elias. I'm here because our own systems are turning on us. And somehow, every time we lose a relay, your name's on the last authorization log." The smile dropped. Just like that, the performance ended. Bran leaned back, and something in his eyes shifted, like a man who'd finally stopped pretending he was the hero of the story. "You don't get it, Lena," he said quietly. "You still think this is a winnable war." She blinked. "What the hell are you talking about? You saw what they did to Shanghai, to Luna. You've been on the front line. You know what they are. They don't stop. They don't negotiate. They don't care." He stood, stepped toward her, not threateningly, but with a kind of worn-out desperation. Like he wasn't trying to intimidate her. He was trying to convince her. "I've been talking to them." Voss's blood turned to ice. "What?" "I made contact weeks ago, quietly, before the first impact. I've been trying to find a path forward, any path that doesn't lead to extinction." And he hesitated. "They gave me an offer." Voss drew her sidearm without blinking. "You sold us out. I saved us." Bran's voice cracked. "Don't you see? They were going to wipe us out entirely. No warning, no hesitation. But I made them pause. I gave them strategic telemetry, only military targets, no civilian locations. That's why they spared certain cities. That's why we've lasted this long." "You gave them Shanghai." Bran flinched. "You gave them Tycho." "Those were sacrifices." Voss stepped forward, weapon trembling in her grip. "You think humanity needs a traitor to survive?" "No," he said softly. "I think humanity needs a realist." What happened next was quiet. Voss didn't scream. She didn't rage. She just looked at him, this man who had carved betrayal into humanity's last chance, and said, "You broke the only rule we have left." And then she pulled the trigger. There was no ceremony, no press release, just a silent report filed in her encrypted log. "Internal breach resolved. Counselor Branchia. Compromised data links severed. Command restored." And that was that. The betrayal ended in a single flash of light. But the damage? That would linger. Back aboard the Icarus, the crew noticed the difference. The enemy attacks slowed. Targeting systems recalibrated. Defense nodes started sinking again. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like the bleeding had been stanched. Kaoru, watching the system data realign, turned to Voss. "What happened up there, Captain?" Voss stared out the viewport, eyes fixed on Earth's wounded curve. "Just took out the trash." But when she closed her eyes later that night, sleep didn't come easy. Because Bran hadn't been a monster. Not really. He was just a man who cracked. A man who saw the end coming and thought maybe, just maybe, he could buy time with someone else's blood. That's the worst kind of enemy. The kind who believes he's doing the right thing. The next morning, Voss addressed the fleet. Her voice, strong and clear, rang through the comms like a battle drum. "To those hearing this, know this truth. There will be no surrender, no backdoor deals, no soft betrayals wrapped in clever words. We fight, together, all of us. For every city lost, we rebuild. For every life stolen, we take 10 of theirs. This is not just a war, it's a reckoning. And we will not go quietly." In the cold dark between planets, a single human voice can feel impossibly small. But in that moment, her words echoed across the void like thunder. And from every battered warship, every scorched platform, every trench dug in the dirt of a dying moon, soldiers stood a little straighter. Because now they knew the rod had been burned out, and humanity was ready to fight with both fists. No compromises, no cowards, just fire and will. You can only push people so far. Take enough from them, cities, homes, lives, and something changes. Something deep, some quiet, ancient switch flips in the soul. And what comes after? That's not survival anymore. That's vengeance. The death of Elias Brand didn't just plug the holes in Earth's defenses, it lit a fuse. Because now humanity knew. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a reckoning. And it was time to send a message of our own, not in words, but in fire. They called it Operation Iron Vengeance, a direct strike into Kolvar-occupied territory. Not a scouting run, not a defensive hold, an offensive. A rare, beautiful word in a war that had been all about holding the line. Captain Voss didn't just authorize it. She built it, pulled every scrap of intel, every drop of strength the fleet had left, and forged it into a single spear. One target, one shot, Kolvar Command Node D-17, a hive structure embedded into a former orbital refinery above Titan. A living station, pulsing with power, acting as the enemy's central command relay for the entire outer system. Destroying it wouldn't just hurt them, it would cripple them. The plan was simple, at least on paper. A three-pronged assault: infiltration from within by Spec Ops, external bombardment from the fleet, and a synchronized reactor overload at the core. A sledgehammer wrapped in a scalpel, and the tip of that spear? An old, beat-up frigate called the UNS Gallows Run. Gallows Run wasn't much to look at. Paint scorched, patches welded over patches. Half its systems had to be kicked to life, but she had heart. And more importantly, she had Commander Juno Reese at the helm. Juno wasn't a politician. She wasn't a poster child for the fleet. She cursed too much, disobeyed too often, and had a habit of turning missions into improvised chaos. But she'd never lost a ship. And more than that, she hated the Kolvar. They'd taken her wife on Europa Station, left her with nothing but a shattered comms log and a wedding ring melted to bone. So when Voss told her the target, Juno didn't blink. She just said, "Good, let's hurt them back." The assault launched at 0400 UTC. 10 ships, 4 stealth pods, 2 squadrons of drone fighters, and a prayer. The fleet dropped out of FTL within range of D-17 like thunder, rippling reality, heat blooming across their hulls as inertial dampeners screamed. Kolvar sensors lit up like a bonfire. Within seconds, the station responded, unfurling weapons from its organic hull, swarms of insectoid fighters bursting from ports like wasps. But the humans were already moving. Reese took Gallows Run straight through the opening barrage, dodging fire with a precision that looked like luck, but was really just fury wearing skin. "Hold her steady," she barked. "Get us close enough to kiss it." Meanwhile, the infiltration team deployed. 4 pods, 6 soldiers each. Elite. They called themselves a team, and they were led by Lieutenant Kai Mercer, a ghost in the system, ex-Black Ops, a man who'd been declared Kia more times than he could count. He and his squad slipped through the chaos like smoke, their drop pods slamming into D-17's surface, breaching through the outer hull like needles through skin. The interior was worse than anyone expected. It breathed. Organic walls pulsed with light and liquid. Tentacles moved in and out of vents, reacting to sound. The structure wasn't just alive, it was aware. "This place isn't a station," Mercer muttered. "It's a brain." And they were inside the skull. They pushed forward, weapons raised, clearing corridor after corridor, fighting not just soldiers, but systems. The walls closed in. Floors melted underfoot. The enemy learned with every engagement. But so did the humans. Because pain makes fast teachers. And we've had plenty of pain. Back outside, Gallows Run was in hell. Kolvar fighters swarmed like hornets, hammering the shields. Half the fleet was already limping. The destroyer Vigilant Dawn exploded in a brilliant cascade, lighting up the rings of Titan like a funeral pyre. Reese didn't flinch. "Charge the main coil. We're making a hole." Her weapons officer blinked. "That'll drain our last reserves." "Good," she said. "Then they won't see us coming back." She took her battered, angry ship straight into the storm. They collided with a Kolvar carrier head-on, skimming its hull close enough to scrape paint, and dropped a payload of breacher missiles point blank. The resulting explosion ripped the enemy carrier apart in 3 separate bursts. But Gallows Run didn't get out clean. They spun, venting oxygen. Life support on Deck 4 failed. Fires erupted in the engine bay. Still, Reese stood tall on the bridge, flames licking the walls behind her. "We're still flying," she growled. "Tell Ash Team it's now or never." Inside D-17, Mercer and his squad reached the core. It wasn't what they expected. Not a reactor, not a control room, a nursery. Rows of fetal Kolvar, hundreds of them, floating in biogel tanks, wired into the station's main systems. They weren't just growing soldiers. They were growing processors, thinkers, connected, aware, learning from every battle, from every kill. Mercer stared at them, then at the charge in his hand. He hesitated, not because he pitied them, but because he knew what it meant. This was genocide. "Orders, sir?" one of his soldiers asked. Mercer looked back, eyes hard. "They made their choice when they opened fire on Earth." He placed the charge, then 3 more. And as the Kolvar core shuddered, sensing its own doom, Mercer activated the relay. The message reached Reese exactly 21 seconds later. "Charges planted. Get us clear." Reese looked at her crippled ship. at her half-dead crew, at the incoming wave of reinforcements darkening the sky behind Saturn. They weren't getting out, but that was never the point. Patch me through to the fleet. The comms officer nodded. This is Commander Juno Reese of Gallows Run, she said. Operation Iron Vengeance is a go. We've punched the hole. Ash team's done their job. Now we finish ours. She paused, then added, softer. If you make it out of here, tell Earth we got the first one. And then she smiled, just once, before turning the ship around, engines flaring for one final run. The detonation tore through D-17 like a scream. Fire and biofluid, shrapnel and light. The core ruptured, sending a wave of destructive feedback through the entire Kolvar system. Ships spun out of control. Fighters dropped like stones. Even the reinforcements faltered, blinded, confused, broken. Humanity had struck first blood, and the enemy felt it. Gallows Run didn't make it out. Ash Team didn't make it either, but their names did. Their stories burned across every broadcast, every survivor's lips, every heartbeat that dared to keep fighting. Because for the first time in the war, the Kolvar didn't just take. They lost. Later, when Voss stood before the fleet, older now, wearier, her voice thick with smoke and memory, she said one thing. They thought we'd never leave Earth, that we'd hide, that we'd break. But what they don't understand is this. You can't break people who've already buried everything they love. You can't scare a species that grew up clawing its way out of the dark. You hurt us. And now we're coming for you. There are things war takes from you that you never get back. Not limbs, not cities, not even people. No, what it really steals are the quiet things. Trust, innocence, the belief that the sun will always rise, and that the ground under your feet will always hold. And after Titan, something shifted. Humanity had struck the Kolvar, hurt them, made them bleed. But when you cut deep into something ancient, something cold and watching, you should expect it to bleed back. The echo came 3 days later. It wasn't an attack, not at first. Just a signal, buried in static, carried on ancient frequencies no one used anymore. It came from the edge of the system, near the Kuiper relay. No ID tags, no encryption, just one thing on loop. Help me, over and over. A human voice, female, panicked, impossible, because the Kuiper relay had been destroyed 2 months ago, or so we thought. Captain Voss didn't trust ghosts, but she couldn't ignore them either. The voice was run through every filter, every forensic tool we had left. No trick, no mimicry, no deception. It was real. Help me. And the match? A woman named Dr. Elena Miles, astrophysicist, engineer, civilian, officially listed as dead, lost with the crew of the Tranquility, a science vessel vaporized in the first wave. But there she was, calling from the dark. So Voss did something no protocol advised. She sent a ship, a single corvette, the UNS Sparrowhawk, light, fast, and stealth-equipped. A whisper of metal in the void. Its mission? Investigate the source, confirm the signal, recover what could be recovered. The man in charge was Captain Jalen Thorne. And if you asked anyone on the fleet for a volunteer who'd walk into the mouth of hell with a smirk, they'd point to him. Thorne didn't waste time on ceremony. He rallied a team of 7. Engineers, hackers, ex-spec ops, all veterans, all survivors. People with more scars than clean skin, and more reasons to hate the Kolvar than to love anything else. But Thorne wasn't angry. He was curious. Because if Elena Miles was still alive, then how? And why was the enemy letting her call out? The Sparrowhawk reached the coordinates 12 hours later. What they found wasn't a signal tower or a wrecked ship. It was a structure, buried in a fragment of shattered moon rock, hidden inside a spinning graveyard of debris. Organic, circular, almost like a nautilus shell made of obsidian and glass. Alive, somehow, breathing with faint pulses of light. And at the center of it, a pod, human-made, half-crushed, frozen. And inside, Dr. Elena Miles. She was unconscious when they found her. Vitals, barely holding. No memory of the last 2 months. Just fragments, dreams, glimpses of them. She remembered being pulled from the wreck, being placed inside the shell, monitored, watched. She didn't eat, didn't breathe in the normal way. But she lived. And the Kolvar? They let her, like a lab rat in a maze. Back aboard the Sparrowhawk, they tried to talk to her. Elena stared at them like someone waking from a nightmare. There were others, she whispered, in the walls. I heard them screaming. I felt them. Other humans? She nodded slowly. No, not just humans. She tapped her temple. They were learning from me, feeding on my thoughts, my dreams, my pain. Thorne leaned forward. What did they want? Her answer was barely a breath. To understand us. But here's the thing about understanding something you fear. It doesn't make you softer. It just makes your aim better. Aboard the Icarus, Voss received the report in silence. This wasn't a weapon test. It was reconnaissance. The Kolvar hadn't just been hitting cities, stations, and satellites. They'd been studying us, dissecting us, not just physically, emotionally, psychologically. Every defeat, every retaliation, every scream into the dark, they recorded it, cataloged it, filed it away. They were mapping the human condition like it was a battlefield, and they were almost done. Get her back, Voss ordered. Full decontamination, neural firewalls, isolate everything. I want Miles under full guard until we know exactly what she knows and what they put in her. But it was already too late, because Elena Miles didn't come alone. She brought the signal with her. It started small. Static on the lower decks of the Sparrowhawk. Glitches in life support. Lights flickering in sequence, too intentional to be random. Then the dreams began. Crew waking up gasping, drenched in sweat. Hearing things, seeing things. A corridor that wasn't there. A whisper in a dead man's voice. Memories that weren't their own. And always, always, the faint sound of a woman calling from the far end of the ship. Help me. By the time they turned back toward the fleet, one engineer had put a plasma round through his own skull. Another tried to open the airlock mid-jump. And Elena? She just sat in her holding cell, humming an old Earth lullaby. Eyes wide, not scared, just empty. They called it cognitive bleed, a kind of psychic malware implanted through memory, transmitted not by machines, but by empathy, by pain. The Kolvar had cracked something. They weren't just studying us. They were becoming us, and using what they learned to fracture the mind before ever firing a shot. When the Sparrowhawk finally reached the Icarus, they were already too late. Elena's body was cold, but her brain was still active, still pulsing, still broadcasting. It took 6 hours to sterilize the signal, another 2 to quarantine the data. And even then, the medtechs who handled her extraction, 2 of them later went missing. The third jumped out an airlock. No screams, just a note left behind. She's still in here. That's when Voss made the call. Full lockdown. Purge protocols activated. Section 7 quarantine. Any ship showing signs of infection would be cut off, isolated, destroyed if necessary. Not everyone agreed, but Voss didn't care, because this wasn't just a war for territory anymore. It was a war for the mind. That night, standing alone in her quarters, Voss stared out at the stars. They used to be beautiful. Now they just looked sharp and far too quiet. She closed her eyes and whispered to the void. If you want to understand us, Kolvar, then let me teach you the final lesson. And she said it without fear, without hate, just with clarity. You should have picked a species that doesn't get back up. There's a moment just before a battle begins. Not when the orders are given, not when the guns are loaded, but that breath before it all erupts. Everything goes quiet, even the fear. It's not calm. It's something else. Like the universe itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if this is the day a species dies or the day it decides not to. This was that day. They called it the Blood Horizon, not because someone named it that after the fact. No, that name was earned, whispered over comms before the first shot was even fired, because that's what it looked like. A wall of fire stretching across the edge of space. The Kolvar fleet had formed a perimeter, ships shaped like broken glass and obsidian wings, pulsing with strange, angry life. 30 war cruisers, hundreds of fighter drones, a sky full of death, and right in front of it, us. What was left of humanity's orbital fleet? Not much. 5 capital ships, 2 squadrons of gunships, some aging defense platforms that barely held together under their own weight. But they were ours. And today, they would not back down. Captain Voss stood at the helm of the Icarus, her face lit by crimson system alerts, her voice calm as a whisper in a storm. We don't have the numbers, she said into the fleet-wide channel. We don't have the tech, and we sure as hell don't have a second chance. She paused, staring out at the distant enemy formation. But we have something they'll never understand. We know what it means to lose, and we kept going anyway. So when this is over, when that horizon burns out, make sure they remember who we are. Then she said 2 words. Simple, final, advance formation. The fleet moved. Engines flared. Hulls groaned. Old ships came alive again, their insides stitched together with scavenged parts and sheer willpower. And ahead of them, the blood horizon pulsed. The Kolvar opened fire first. Always did. Green lances of plasma tore across space like celestial whips, carving apart the first wave of gunships. The Grissom and Helena went dark within minutes. No screams, no last words, just silent flashes of flame in the void. But we kept going. Because this wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about making sure the last thing the Kolvar saw was a human charging into the jaws of extinction, middle finger raised and teeth bared. Kaoru, Voss's second-in-command, ran comms, issuing orders with surgical clarity. The ship shook with every impact, every near miss, every victory bought with blood. Flank pattern Omega, she barked. Divert drone squadron to port side breach. Lock primary railguns on that lead cruiser now. Outside the viewport, space looked like it was on fire. And in the middle of that firestorm, the Leviathan arrived. It was the biggest Kolvar ship anyone had ever seen, over 2 kilometers long, bristling with spires and limbs and whatever passed for muscle under its chitin armor. It moved like a sea creature, slow, deliberate, monstrous. And when it opened fire, it didn't shoot weapons. It screamed, a sonic blast, low, resonant, carried through the vacuum not as sound, but as vibration, shaking ships apart from the inside. The Tallahassee cracked open in one long groan. The Kusanagi lost its main reactor. Dozens of smaller crafts spiraled out like broken bones. And through it all, the Leviathan moved forward. Target that thing, Voss ordered, voice steady despite the chaos. All batteries. Ma'am, Kaoru said. We don't have enough firepower. Then give it everything anyway. The Icarus turned, engines roaring, and launched a full salvo. Railguns screamed. Pulse cannons lit up. Missiles painted the dark with streaks of furious light. And it hurt the Leviathan. Not much, but enough. Because that's the thing about giants. They bleed too. You just have to cut deep enough. Meanwhile, the ground team deployed. You didn't think this was just space combat, did you? No. Humanity doesn't just shoot from afar. When things get close, we bring knives. A strike team, codenamed Forge Squad, dropped onto the surface of the Kolvar supercruiser during the height of the battle. 10 soldiers in drop pods, piercing armor like meteorites. They landed hard. Inside the Leviathan, everything was alive. Walls moving, nerves twitching, air humming with sound that felt wrong. But Forge Squad didn't slow down. They set charges, fought hand to hand. When the creatures poured in, slender, tall, impossibly fast, they didn't panic. They fought like it was the last fight they'd ever get. For most of them, it was. Sergeant Daya Singh led the charge to the Leviathan's heart. 2 broken ribs, one arm shattered, still running, still fighting. She planted the core disruptor, looked up at the mass of pulsing alien machinery around her, and said one thing into her helmet cam before the blast took her. This is how we say hello. Then white light, then silence. The Leviathan screamed again, this time not as an attack, but as a death cry. It buckled, twisted, and then exploded in a blast that took out 6 Kolvar cruisers around it. Voss saw the shockwave coming and smiled. The Kolvar formation began to fracture, not retreat, not yet. But for the first time, they hesitated. They reeled. They felt it. But the cost was heavy. Only 2 human capital ships remained, the Icarus and the Rook. Bodies floated in space, fragments of hull, of life, of stories, gone, but not forgotten. Because as long as one ship stood, as long as one breath was drawn in defiance, the war wasn't over. And in the quiet that followed, once the last Kolvar drone had been disabled, once the Icarus limped out of range, bleeding atmosphere and glory, Voss looked around her broken bridge and said softly, "We didn't win." Kaoru, blood trickling down her temple, looked up. "No, ma'am," Voss nodded, "but we made them bleed." Later, in the crew quarters that no longer had walls, the survivors gathered. Some laughed, some cried, some just stared at nothing. But none of them regretted it. Because out there, beyond the blood horizon, a message had been sent. Humanity was not dead. It was furious. There's a strange silence that follows after you punch a god in the mouth. Not peace, not victory, just silence. Heavy, dense, like the universe itself is pausing to ask, did they really just do that? The destruction of the Leviathan didn't end the war, but it did something far more important. It changed the rhythm. For the first time since this whole damn thing began, the Kolvar weren't pushing forward. They were stalling. The blood horizon had faded, but in its place, ash, literal and figurative. Wreckage drifted like slow snowfall across the solar system. Dead ships, frozen bodies, fragments of what used to be hope, or something like it. And deep within that graveyard, among twisted metal and echoes of screams, humanity did what we always do. We crawled out of the smoke and started planning our next move. The Icarus was barely holding together. Half her decks had been gutted by plasma fire. The main reactor was humming like a dying animal. Life support was running on backup generators scavenged from a dead freighter, but she was still flying. And as long as she flew, Captain Voss refused to give up the fight. She stood on the bridge, arms crossed, a patch over one eye where shrapnel had torn her vision away during the last engagement. The pain didn't bother her. She'd gotten used to pain. Hell, in a war like this, pain was a reminder that you were still real. Status? She asked. Kara looked up from a screen flickering with static. 2 ships left in the fleet. Rook's functional, barely. We've picked up salvage from 3 wrecks. Mostly ammo and scrap. And the enemy? Kara hesitated, then tapped the screen. A faint signal. Pulsing. Slow. Rhythmic. They're burning their own dead. The Kolvar didn't retreat. Not really. But after the Leviathan fell, they started cleansing. Systematically. Anything that had been damaged, tainted, or touched by us. They purged it. Not out of fear. Out of disgust. You ever see something like that before? Karu asked, watching a Kolvar warship tear apart one of its own cruisers, feeding the pieces into a strange blue core. Voss didn't answer right away. Then, with a dry voice, no, but it's a hell of a compliment. So humanity did what it had always done best. We adapted. We struck from the dark, raiding parties, shadow runs, hit-and fates. We stopped fighting like a proper military and started fighting like what we really were, a species that didn't know how to quit. They called the new strategy Ash Doctrine. Fight from the ruins, hide in the smoke, turn the wreckage into weapons. One of those missions, maybe the most important, was led by Commander Ari Harlan. A salvage op, that's what they called it. But really, it was a hunt. Ari and her team of 9 were dropped behind enemy lines on a refitted mining rig barely held together by duct tape and rage. The mission? Board an abandoned Kolvar Spire station, deep in Saturn's shadow. Why? Because the Spire held something different. It was broadcasting, but not to us. To them. A code. Repeating. Looping. Translated by Dr. Malin, the last xenolinguist we had left. The code said, assimilation compromised. Protocol shift initiated. Target. Origin. And if that didn't chill your bones, nothing would. Target. Origin. What the hell did that mean? Was Earth about to become ground zero? Were they going to reset the invasion? No one knew. But if the Spire had answers, anything, we needed them. Ari's team reached the station in blackout. No engines, no comms, just inertia and timing. They docked under cover of the station's own magnetic shadow, slipped through a decompression breach, and started exploring. Inside, silence. Again, not peace. Just that awful stillness, like walking into a room where something terrible had happened hours ago, and the air hasn't forgiven it yet. The station wasn't empty. It was preserved, like a museum exhibit. Alien control panels lit but untouched. Organic walls pulsing softly. Pods filled with half-grown Kolvar juveniles, suspended in some kind of hibernation fluid. And in the central chamber, a mirror. Not reflective, not made of glass, but it looked like one, until they got close and realized it wasn't reflecting them. It was showing them their homes, their memories, their grief, like the station had tapped into their minds and spilled it onto a canvas of light and sound. Ari froze, because it was showing her brother, dead 3 years, killed in the first orbital strike over Manila. There he was, smiling, saying nothing, just looking at her. The team tried to destroy it, planted charges, but the mirror absorbed them, neutralized them, then began speaking, not in Kolvar tongue, but in English. A woman's voice, Elena Miles, or something using her shape. You are not prey, it said. You are infection. Ari's pulse slowed. Her trigger finger tightened. You are not to be harvested. You are to be isolated, burned, buried. The mirror flashed red, and every Kolvar juvenile in the station opened its eyes. Not children, not soldiers. Something in between. They attacked without hesitation. The battle was short, brutal. 5 soldiers died in the first 30 seconds. 3 more by the time Ari reached the emergency evac port. She didn't run. Not exactly. She recorded all of it. Every scream, every word, every move. And as the last soldier sealed her into the evac pod with their blood on her armor, she looked back at the station and said, softly, let them burn. Then she triggered the failsafe. The blast lit up Saturn's orbit like a second sun. Ari's pod spun into the dark, tumbling, silent, but alive. And inside that tiny coffin of metal and fire, she clutched the drive, the footage, the proof. When she was recovered 4 days later, barely breathing, Voss herself was there. Ari looked up, eyes sunken, voice cracked. They're changing, she rasped. They're not trying to conquer anymore. What then? They're trying to erase us. The words hit hard, because deep down, Humanity had always assumed there was some angle here, some strategy, some desire for territory or control or victory. But that wasn't it. The Kolvar weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to scrub us out of the universe like a virus in a petri dish, to make sure nothing human ever touched the stars again. That night, Voss stood alone in the observation deck of the Icarus. She watched Earth from orbit, still shining, still turning, still home. But for how long? She didn't cry, didn't rage, just stood there, stone, steel. Then she whispered, quiet enough that no one else would ever hear. Let's see you erase this. Because whatever the Kolvar didn't want to understand, was this. You can kill our people. You can destroy our cities. You can poison our skies. But so long as one of us remains, one bloody, screaming, stubborn piece of this species refuses to fall, then you haven't won. You've just made the survivors angrier. And that's the real mistake. War doesn't just happen in the skies. It doesn't only take place among the stars, where ships explode and fleets dance in deadly ballet. No, war reaches down. It digs deep into the soil, the cities, the bones of the world itself. It carves scars not just on the bodies of soldiers, but on the streets where children once played, on the cracked pavement where lovers held hands, on the places where people dared to dream. The world below the war, the one the cameras don't always show you, is where humanity's grit is forged, not in shining armor or steel ships, but in mud, blood, and quiet moments of brutal survival. Earth was still standing, not unbroken, not untouched, but breathing. And beneath its bruised surface, something extraordinary was happening. Because while the fleet battled in the void, the ground war was no less fierce. The cities were sieged, the forests scarred by fire, the deserts riddled with trenches, and everywhere, people fought, not just soldiers, civilians, mothers and fathers, kids old enough to carry a rifle. In the shattered remnants of New Chicago, a young woman named Maya moved like a ghost. She wasn't a soldier. She never wanted to be. But after losing her family in the first wave of attacks, after watching her neighborhood burn to ash, she did what anyone desperate enough would. She fought. Maya's days blurred together, scavenging the ruins for food, dodging patrols of Kolvar drones that searched for any sign of resistance, helping the underground networks deliver medicine, ammo, and hope. The people she worked with were a ragtag group, a mix of former soldiers, engineers, students, and survivors. None of them trained, all of them hungry. One night, as the city lights flickered out one by one, Maya sat on the roof of a crumbling building, looking out over the horizon. The sky was bruised purple and orange, the distant rumble of artillery like thunder that never ended. She thought about her brother, lost somewhere in the war. She thought about the promise she made, the promise to keep fighting. Because if she didn't, who would? Her calm crackled suddenly. A voice she recognized, Jace, a former engineer turned resistance leader, came through, urgent and low. Maya, we've got a problem. Talk to me, she said, standing, alert. The Kolvar are moving deeper underground. We knew that. This time it's different. They're digging tunnels, expanding networks, preparing for a siege. Maya swallowed hard. A siege. The underground tunnels beneath New Chicago weren't new. People had built them decades ago for subways, utilities, and some old war bunkers. Now they were becoming something else. The front lines. The Kolvar had realized they couldn't win by fire and plasma alone. Not here, not on Earth. So they adapted. They went underneath, silent, creeping, relentless. And humanity had to follow. Maya and her team moved through the tunnels like shadows. The only light, their flickering flashlights cutting through thick darkness. The air smelled of dust, metal, and something else, fear. They knew the Kolvar would be waiting. They always were. And sure enough, as they rounded a corner, the silence shattered. Metallic claws clanged. Alien voices hissed. Then a flood of movement. Kolvar soldiers pouring from side passages, their armor glinting cold in the dark. The fight was brutal. Close quarters. No room to maneuver. Every shot echoed like thunder. Maya's heart hammered as she ducked behind a rusted pipe, returning fire. She saw Jace fall, clutching his side, blood blooming across his jacket. No, she screamed, but there was no time to stop. They had to move. They fought their way deeper. Every step forward paid in sweat, pain, and loss. But it wasn't just about killing the enemy. It was about survival, about protecting what little was left, about making sure Earth remained a home. In one of the deeper chambers, Maya found something unexpected. A group of Kolvar prisoners, not soldiers, civilians, captured families, terrified, silent. Their eyes begged a question she didn't have the answer to. Maya's rage didn't falter. If anything, it grew. Because this war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about humanity, and the lengths we would go to protect it. Back on the surface, Captain Voss received reports from the ground. The tunnels, the prisoners, the fight for the soul of Earth itself. It was raw, it was real, and it was a reminder that no matter how far the war spread, no matter how many stars we claimed or lost, Earth was home, and it was worth everything. The story of Maya, Jace, and their fight below the Warlands wasn't about glory. It was about grit, about sacrifice, about the unbreakable spirit that thrums through every human heart. Because in the darkest places, when all seems lost, that's when humanity shines the brightest. There comes a moment in every war when you realize, this is it, the line you draw in the sand, the last breath before the storm, the point where everything you are and everything you've lost comes together in a single, burning choice: fight or fade away into silence. For humanity, that moment came beneath the shattered skies of Earth, under the smoke and ash of a planet that had already been through hell. The Kolvar had pushed hard, too hard. The last major city strongholds were on their knees. Supply lines strangled, the fleet weakened, and still, the enemy pressed forward. Like a dark tide, relentless and unyielding. But humanity? We don't fold. We don't break. Not when the whole world is watching. Not when every life, every memory, every heartbeat is on the line. Captain Voss stood on the command bridge of the battered Icarus, her eyes scanning the tactical displays glowing with red alerts and blaring warnings. Behind her, the bridge hummed with the tension of soldiers, engineers, medics, all holding fast. She swallowed the fatigue like a bitter pill. "This is more than a fight for survival," she said, voice steady but heavy. "It's a fight for what it means to be human." In the ruins of what used to be Paris, Maya readied her team. Their weapons were tired, their bodies even more so, but their spirits? Unbreakable. "This is it," she said quietly. "The last stand." Across earth and sky, the world held its breath. The battle began with a roar. Not just guns and plasma, not just explosions and screams, but the sound of a species refusing to die. The Icarus and the Rook took the fight into orbit, drawing the Kolvar fleet away from the cities below. Gunfire lit up the darkness, turning stars into fireworks of fury and sacrifice. Below, Maya's squad advanced through crumbling streets. Each corner, each alley, a potential trap. Each step forward paid in blood. But they moved with purpose, with fire, with rage. The Kolvar were fierce, fast, cruel. They fought with alien precision and unyielding will. But the humans? They fought with heart, with desperation, with everything they had left. On the Icarus, Captain Voss coordinated the fleet's final gambit. "We'll draw them in close," she ordered. "Then hit their core systems with everything we've got." The plan was risky, near suicidal. But when you're backed into a corner, you don't ask for easy. You make your stand. Maya's team reached the city's central command bunker, the place where the enemy had rooted their operations. They breached the gates. Gunfire erupted. Bodies fell. But they pressed on. Inside, Maya faced a Kolvar commander. Not just a soldier. A symbol. A living weapon crafted for destruction. Their eyes met. Neither flinched. The fight was brutal, close, personal. Maya's hands shook. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything riding on this moment. She dodged a strike, fired, hit. The commander collapsed. Outside, the Icarus unleashed its final salvo. Energy beams tore through the Kolvar mothership shields. Explosions rippled across its hull. Systems failed. The great beast stumbled. The fleet followed. Every ship, every fighter, every pilot pushed beyond exhaustion. Because this was the moment when the tide could turn, or everything could end. Back on Earth, as Maya and her team held the bunker, the Kolvar began to retreat. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. The world below the war started to breathe again. Slowly, tentatively, but alive. Captain Voss watched the enemy withdraw. A weary smile touched her lips. "We did it," she whispered. "Not because we were stronger, because we were human." And in that moment, beneath the battered skies of a scarred Earth, humanity showed its fiercest truth. We survive, we fight, we rise, because no matter how dark the night, the dawn is ours.